Hey guys, I'm Brandon Adams, and this is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans. Hello to you, and thanks for being with us. Mike Griffith later on. He is in Destin, Florida for the SEC spring meetings, and my, oh my, weren't things interesting there yesterday when it comes to Georgia coach Kirby Smart. In particular, his comments about the Georgia-Florida series. As you might imagine, we will deal with that in big fashion on our program today, and we'll talk a little recruiting too. Zachary Evans, top 5, Georgia included. What does it all mean? We'll try to decide. It's DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, begins right now.
Presented by DawgNation.com, this is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans. Here's your host, Brandon Adams.
I am just like you in that a lot of times when I go online, be it just the regular internet, Twitter, something like that, I cannot believe how nasty people are with each other. And some of these topics in life are obviously serious and the stakes are high, and yet it still seems like the level of decorum or lack of decorum, I guess, in online discussion sometimes is just maddening. It's hard to believe that people could be that vicious with each other. That's one of the reasons why we escape to sports, right? Because sports offers a more fun type of debate. Sports offers a better kind of conversation where there doesn't have to be a bad guy, where it's all just fun, distraction from the more serious things of life. And I think we have an example today of what I believe is, in a realm of fun debates, which is what sports provides, this is kind of a fun debate for Georgia fans. I truly do not believe there is a villain on one side or the other of this discussion. I think there are strong arguments to be made and valid points to be made between both factions of Georgia fans. The issue that I'm talking about is Georgia-Florida and where it should be played. Should it be played in Jacksonville every single year? Should it be played in Athens one year, Gainesville the next, and then alternating that way? Should it be some sort of, is it amalgam, is that the right word? Amalgam of these where you go Athens, Jacksonville, Gainesville, and kind of rotate that way? I think that you can make a case on all of these sides for all of this stuff when it comes to Georgia-Florida. And here on DawgNation Daily, we have done a lot of this over the years. And it seems like just about every summer we end up doing some of this kind of stuff again because these are the kinds of things you talk about when you don't have any games to talk about. You talk about how things should be in college football. Well, today it's not Blowhard podcast host or video host that starts this debate, though. It is Georgia coach Kirby Smart himself because of some things that he said yesterday. Eyebrow-raising for me when DawgNation's Mike Griffith asked him about, on the heels of, and we'll get into this more during the week, Kirby kind of defending once again during the SEC spring meetings in Destin, Florida, his penchant for wanting tough non-conference schedules and how that's going to factor into the future of the college football playoff debate and those credentials earned from playing big-time non-conference opponents is going to make things easier for Georgia to get in the college football playoff. Maybe easier is not the right word, but certainly it's going to be able to navigate a path for Georgia to the college football playoff because you're playing tougher schedules. Kirby Smart made that point. But then Mike Griffith stood up and said, yeah, but what about your home schedule? If you're going to Norman, Oklahoma, you're losing a home game. If you're going to Austin, Texas, you're losing a home game. And you've already lost one because you play in Jacksonville every single year. What does that do for that? And Kirby Smart gave an answer that I believe got Georgia fans' attention. Here's Mike, and then here's Kirby.
How could this affect the game in Jacksonville? You're already down one major recruiting weekend to Alabama, LSU, Auburn. Does this have an effect on the potential of the Jacksonville series going home and all? The Florida series?
I think that's always up for discussion. We have a contract with Jacksonville. It's a couple years out. I think you're always looking to see what you can do to help your program get better. So nothing's off the table, but nothing's been decided either.
So Kirby says the contract's a couple years out. It runs through 2021. Is that correct? Am I right about that? 2021 for the Georgia-Florida series. So really, if the contract ends in 2021, the negotiations for the extension of that contract should be going on right now. These things, kind of start being worked on, obviously, ahead of time. And Kirby Smart says, hey, everything's on the table. Coming here to Athens and playing this game every other year, that's on the table. Nothing's been decided. And for me, someone who's followed this issue pretty closely over the years, I detected a little bit of a sea change when you hear the coach of Georgia say something along those lines. Because for me in the past, when you've heard administration-level officials talking about Georgia-Florida, it seems like it's always come with a strong willingness to keep that game in Jacksonville and preserve what has been a tradition for college football fans and a lucrative agreement for the University of Georgia. Kirby Smart leaving the door open to not do that, for me, is kind of a new realm of this debate, so to speak. However, maybe it's not supposed to be that much of a surprise that Kirby Smart said what he said yesterday, because I have speculated out loud. After all, speculating out loud is kind of what I do for a living, but I have speculated out loud that it almost seems like maybe Kirby Smart's just not that big of a fan of the world's largest outdoor cocktail party. Let me go back to last November as an example of this. We talked about this on DawgNation Daily not all that long ago, but Kirby was asked a couple weeks after the cocktail party this past season about the future of that series, and he said something at the time that I thought was really pretty poignant. Smart said, yeah, absolutely, it costs you a recruiting weekend. He means playing that game in Jacksonville. You don't get to have anybody, and they don't get to have anybody. So our version of the LSU-Alabama game is held in Jacksonville, meaning that big-time conference game that everybody has circled and everybody cares about. He says ours is held at a neutral site every year, and we don't have prospects. So Kirby goes on to say, it's not conducive to recruiting. Absolutely it's not. It's just the way it's been done before. It's just not great for recruiting because you lose a home game every other year, and it just comes with it. But it certainly helps to have more games. That's Kirby Smart from November speaking on the future of the Georgia-Florida game. And the phrase there that sticks out to me more than any other, and I'm going to underline this on my little notes here, he says, it's just the way it's been done before. I was on with the folks in Athens Sports Radio 960 The Ref this morning, and I said, it almost seems like we've got a bit of a showdown right now going on, and I'm sure I'm overhyping this, but it certainly has the look and feel of Kirby Smart taking on tradition. Kirby Smart taking on the way things have been done before. Kirby Smart, I believe, maybe behind the scenes, based on the circumstantial evidence, suggesting that maybe the way that things have been done before is not the way things should be done going forward. And as I said off the top of the program, there's a pretty strong case to be made for that. I mean, listen to Jeff Sintel talk. We'll have Before the Hedges later on this afternoon on the DawgNation video channels. Jeff was on our show yesterday. Jeff's about to be on vacation, but we've heard plenty from him already this spring and early summer. And the one thing that you already hear from Jeff a lot is there's this growing list of visitors already seemingly forming for the Georgia-Notre Dame game coming up in September. Because when recruits have their choice of which games they want to go to for, in some cases, unofficial visits, in some cases, official visits, recruits just choose the biggest games. You can take a look at the grid schedule for college football, especially here in the South, and you can say, okay, this week everybody's going to be at this game, and then this week everybody's going to be at this game, and then this week everybody's going to be in this game. And with Georgia in week four playing Notre Dame in a week where Clemson's playing Cupcake Central and Alabama's playing Cupcake Central, all the recruits are going to want to be at that Georgia-Notre Dame game. When you have that really sexy home game, you just get people wanting to be in your building, not just fans, but recruits alike. And Kirby Smart says, with the Jacksonville thing every year, we missed the chance to do that. And that's a really strong argument. But on the other hand, Georgia recruiting is doing fine, as it is right now, and the world's largest outdoor cocktail party is a tradition that really matters. And for many people, it's really fun. And some people will push back and say, yeah, but Jacksonville as a city is a dump. It kind of is, but St. Simon's is not. And let me tell you, the Golden Isles, as they like to call them, the Georgia coast, that is rocking and rolling on Georgia-Florida weekend. That's the kind of week away or weekend away that is coveted and dreamed about for 11 months until you finally get a chance to be back there for the cocktail party again. Maintaining that tradition, not letting that go away, is also a pretty worthy argument. There's a case to be made for that as well. As I've said before, I'm in favor of the cocktail party the way that it is, but I also have great respect for Kirby Smart, and the fact that he's won as much as he has early on at Georgia gives his opinion a lot of cachet. If it is true that Smart would want to change this series, he would sway my viewpoint just a bit. I don't know that it completely changes my mind, but it certainly gives me a pause and makes me take a second look at the tradition that I've held dear, which is the world's largest outdoor cocktail party. I'd love to see some honest-to-goodness polling on this from Georgia fans. Like really big, committed Georgia fans who have some skin in the game. Where do you want to see this game played? I think that's kind of an interesting question to ask, and as we said, there is room to disagree, and there's no real bad guy in this discussion because we're talking about the better of two pretty good scenarios when it comes to Georgia. One more final quick point on this. There's also another source apparently heard from on this, Matt Hayes, who you may remember as a longtime writer for the Sporting News. now I guess working for Bleacher Report. He also does some radio in Jacksonville. He tweeted this yesterday. He's kind of a long-time college football reporter. He says, when it comes to the Georgia-Florida game, sources tell me both schools currently make more annually playing in Jacksonville than on campus and will make a, quote, significant amount more with a new deal being ironed out. Now, if you look at Matt Hayes' Twitter bio, it shows him as living in St. Augustine, Florida. And as I said before, he does a little bit of radio work there in Jacksonville. So do that what you will with what his source might be for that. It seems reasonable to assume that maybe he's getting some information from a Jacksonville-based entity, which obviously would love to keep this series there in Jacksonville. Here's what I do know. The negotiations to keep this game in the so-called Gator Bowl, I believe they have been intensified by the words of Kirby Smart. And maybe Kirby Smart secretly does want this thing home and home, and maybe he gets his way. Or maybe Jacksonville is forced to pony up a whole bunch more money to keep this game where it has been for an awful long time. My name is Brandon Adams, and this is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans. Hello to you, and thanks for being with us live on video today, 10 a.m., DawgNation Facebook, YouTube, Twitter, radio at noon on Athens Sports Radio 960 The Ref, and we are available as a podcast wherever you find them. Apple Podcast Player, Google Podcast Player, and the world-famous DawgNation.com. Pretty much wherever you find podcasts, you can find the on-demand audio version of our program. We're really glad to have you with us. And by the way, speaking of the world-famous DawgNation.com, hope you will go there and find out more information about our DawgNation Days of Summer. Y'all, it's getting close. We're what? Literally, I think tomorrow's 2 weeks. Is that right? I think tomorrow is 2 weeks from the kickoff of DawgNation Days of Summer on June 13th in Callaway Resort and Gardens. Yeah, if you're watching a video right now, this is where we're going to be, putting our feet in those lakes. My kids have already seen this little water park deal. They can't wait to be a part of that. My wife wants to, tour the gardens. We're going to have a fun college football conversation there that night. Callaway Gardens is nice. We're going to play some golf on Friday. Go to DawgNation.com. You can find a link to kind of get in on that. Our buddy BJ, who helps out here at DawgNation, he's kind of overseeing the golf on this. We'd love to have you be a part of our groupings going on Friday afternoon to play golf. This is a beautiful getaway from Atlanta, and it is going to be awesome. We have sold a ton of rooms for this, but my understanding is they're going to make a little more room in our VIP reception, which begins at 5 p.m. that night. For some folks, if you still want to get involved in the big event itself, kicks off that night at 6. We got some special guests coming. It's going to be a great college football conversation and a fun summer getaway. And guess what? After that, we're going to do it all again Thursday, August 1st at Brasstown Valley Resort and Spa. What an amazing summer it's going to be around DawgNation. We're calling it DawgNation Days of Summer, and I absolutely cannot wait. All right, we just heard from Kirby Smart from Destin, Florida. We'll talk to Mike Griffith in Destin, Florida, who covered Kirby and had that exchange you just heard from him a moment ago. We'll do that on DawgNation Daily here coming up. But before that, let's go around the doghouse, presented today by Engineered Solutions of Georgia. And my, oh my, things have gotten interesting in the world of recruiting. Now, as a general rule, y'all know that I am a fan. I've never pretended not to be a fan. I like to do the show from the perspective of the fans. I'm not one of these guys that sits up in an ivory tower and talks down to fans. I talk with fans. That's always what I want my job to be and what my role to be here at DawgNation Daily. However, as a fan, I also think it's really important in my own personal, behavior to kind of not get too, excited too soon, maybe, not get my hopes up too soon. But I found it really interesting yesterday, and this came out relatively late in the evening, that 5-star running back Zachary Evans, on the heels of Georgia seemingly losing out on a top-flight running back, Marshawn Lloyd, who on Memorial Day chose South Carolina over a host of suitors, Georgia included in that. Well, Zachary Evans drops his top 5, and the Dogs were included. Let me see the tweet from Evans here for a moment, where he says thanks to everybody like always and announces his top 5 schools of Ohio State, Alabama, LSU, Oklahoma, and Georgia. Now, this to me is interesting for a number of reasons. One of the reasons is that the top 5 for Zachary Evans is almost identical to the top 4 of Kendall Milton. The only school that Evans included that Milton didn't was Oklahoma. And at one point in time, there had been a good bit of online chatter connecting Kendall Milton to Oklahoma. So you've got 2 elite running backs, both of which are no strangers to conversations here on DawgNation Daily, and they are both seemingly choosing from the same group of schools. I find that fascinating. But where I think a Georgia fan has a little bit of freedom now to get a little bit anticipatory about what the next move for Zachary Evans is going to be is when Evans' name came up on our show yesterday, and it did come up because It's sort of that what's next after Marshawn Lloyd chooses South Carolina. The most ungettable get of all seemed to be Zachary Evans. Number one player in the country according to the 24/7 Sports Composite, a terrific 5-star running back. But as I said yesterday, I've been led to believe a million times that eventually Evans was going to choose either Texas or Texas A&M. The in-state product from Texas was going to stay in the state of Texas for his college career. But did you notice a moment ago when I rallied off those top 5 names, I didn't mention the Longhorns, and I did not mention the Aggies. And I think the absence of Lone Star State programs in the Zachary Evans top 5, assuming he sticks to this top 5 and he doesn't pull a Jay Hardy and turn a top 5 into a top 7 at some point in time, assuming he sticks to this top 5, the absence of in-state schools, I think, makes Georgia a much bigger factor and a much bigger player in the Zachary Evans recruitment. And I think this is going to be really a big story to watch. Now, obviously, for Georgia fans, myself included, this is not about, at least right now, the hopes of getting Evans or Kendall Milton. I think it's still fair to say, can Georgia get Evans and Milton? That's a tough pull, and it's maybe far more unlikely than it is likely. But I think the summer just got a lot more interesting for Georgia running back recruiting, and I, for one, cannot wait to see where all of this goes next. It's Around the Doghouse. It is presented today by Engineered Solutions of Georgia. And listen, for those of us who are homeowners, there are occasionally these moments where you really stop and take a beat because you see something that looks just a little bit different than you're used to. I'm talking about a crack in your foundation on a wall outside your house, or maybe a little bit of an uneven floor, or maybe some water down in the basement. It happens for virtually everybody, but when it does happen for you, it's going to be kind of this nerve-wracking thing about what do you do about that? Well, here's what you do. You talk to experts as fast as you can. When I say expert, I don't mean just some fly-by-night dude that has a company. I mean an engineer. An organization like Engineered Solutions of Georgia that has a full-time engineer on staff. This is your house. This is serious business. You want to make sure you're trusting smart people to help get it fixed and get it back in full working order. This is the structural integrity of your home. Trust an engineer like the folks at Engineered Solutions of Georgia to get this done. Give them a call at 678-ESOG-NOW. That's 678-ESOG now. All right, coming up later on, Nick Saban said something yesterday that kind of raised my eyebrows just a bit. We will talk about that. We'll also catch up with Mike Griffith here in just a moment. It's DawgNation Daily. In fact, let's speak to Mike Griffith right now. So I kind of have to say that for the radio and podcast audience, but we will get Mike Griffith coming up in just a couple of moments here. We'll find out how he's doing today. And we'll talk to him from Destin, Florida. While we're waiting on Mike, it's actually kind of a good time to get a few of your comments in, because later on today's program, we are going to have to kind of get out of here, I always say semi-on time, and some people start to wonder what does on time even really mean. We're going to have to get out a little earlier than normal today. We got some business we got to take care of. So let me take a few comments right now, and my guess is the Georgia-Florida series will probably be a pretty hot topic in our comment sections today. So let me go to YouTube first, and we'll dive into there, and then we will get some other comments after that coming up in just a moment on Facebook as well. So before Mike Griffith comes on, Kevin Blackman says, "Boo! You always leave early." Kevin, I don't know about that. I feel like we've done a pretty long run of comments here as of late. I feel like we've done a pretty good job with that. Justin Wolf says someone's going to lose no matter where the game is played. So, Justin, here's the thing I think to remember. There was a time, and let's face it, for a long time, Georgia's record against Florida was not very good. And at the time, you had maybe some Georgia fans who wanted to change the Georgia-Florida series because they thought the series set up unfairly for Georgia. In 2019, I truly don't believe that's the case. I actually don't think that was the case as much back then, although I guess there were some travel issues that Georgia faced that Florida did not face. But as it stands now, Georgia, I believe, now flying out of Athens to the game, that's not that much different than taking a bus from Gainesville. Both teams are going to spend the night in hotels on Friday night. Ultimately, it's not really that different from a travel standpoint. And unfortunately, when Georgia was losing a lot of games to Florida, it wasn't losing it because it was mostly a Florida home game. It was losing it because for a long time, and I hate this, it pains me. This is one of the reasons why I'm such a big Gator hater the way that I am now. But for a long time, Florida was just better than Georgia. They're just better than Georgia. And it seemed like, the ultimate source of frustration. But ultimately, the bad record that Georgia had in the cocktail party was, to me, not so much about the logistics around the game as it was the fact that Georgia just wasn't as good as it should have been. Just, kind of not maximizing all the resources in the program. And so I think when you listen to this 2019 debate, you're not going to hear a lot of, the game's unfair for Georgia because it's played in Jacksonville. The Dogs have dominated the last two matchups here in the world's largest outdoor cocktail party. This becomes about maximizing recruiting opportunity there in the city of Athens. That's what this becomes about. So I think that's fair to point out. Georgia Peach on YouTube says, if Evans and Milton for Georgia, he says, I will get a tattoo. Or Georgia Peach says, I will get a tattoo. Yeah, that would be that might be tattoo worthy, Peach, for sure. Dimitri Sullivan checking in to say, I coached Nicholas Claxton in high school and very excited to see what he does at the pro level. Go Dogs. Yeah, Dimitri, we were going to mention that later on in the program, that Nicholas Claxton did announce yesterday that he is going to keep his name in the NBA draft. Apparently, Claxton's gotten some pretty good feelings and some pretty good thoughts out there that he has a chance to be a first-round pick. And so what a great thing that is for him. The UGA basketball legacy, his dad, Charles Claxton, was a well-known player for the Bulldogs at one point in time, and now Nicholas Claxton's going to follow in his footsteps there. So I think that's a really nice thing to think about. And by the way, Tram Dickerson does correct me that Georgia Peach is a she, and I should correct myself on that. Thanks, Tram, for reminding me about that. And we look forward to seeing how Claxton does the next level. I will admit, selfishly, I would have loved to have seen how Claxton fits in with Anthony Edwards. I would have loved to have seen that. I think a veteran presence for the Georgia basketball team this year would have been really important. And I think that would have been a crucial part of, Georgia's pursuit of the NCAA tournament. I think if you look at how Auburn made its run in the Final Four this year, it used veteran players. That was a big part of the recipe for Auburn this year. I think for the most part, college basketball works that way. Freshmen get a lot of attention and they, generate a lot of draft buzz when it comes to winning games in March. Guys who've been on college floors really seem to thrive. Let's face it, the college game can be a little physical, and knowing how to take that pounding, I think, matters, and knowing how to handle a kind of coached-up level of defense that you don't see a lot in the 18 and under realm. I think that's a very, very different kind of a thing. And Dimitri Sullivan says he would like to have seen that too. Yeah, because I just think that Edwards is going to be a ton of fun to watch, and pairing a veteran with him I think would have been really fun there as well. Now, we'll see now that Claxton's not going to be there. Is there room for like a graduate transfer or something like that? We shall see. But I'm very curious to see kind of where it goes from here. Let me go over to Facebook here for a moment, and we'll hopefully catch up with Mike Griffith in just a bit. As Jim Rome used to say, he is scheduled to appear. All right, on the Facebook side of things here for a moment, your comments over here. You want to talk some Georgia, Florida, we can do that. You want to talk about the Zachary Evans stuff, we can do that here as well. Alan Frazier says, Georgia had their way with Florida in the 80s. Florida had them run in the 90s and the 2000s. Now it's Georgia's turn. Stomp them Gators into the ground. And, yeah, I think, Alan, that's a really important point to remember, that kind of no matter where the game is played, Athens every other year, Jacksonville every year, Georgia's got a lot of catching up to do in this rivalry, and I look forward to hopefully seeing that take place. Marcino Askew says, B.A., did you read what Zachary Evans said about Texas? Do you think UGA was unmotivated, or was Texas just better? I got here late. I actually didn't see that comment, Marcinio. You'll have to fill me in on that because I did not see that. But I would be interested to hear that. Mike Bennett says the Georgia-Florida game is a streaky game. Dooley owned Florida, and Steve Spurrier owned Georgia. Now Kirby will own Florida for a long time. If that does indeed happen, it will sort of set up itself as a couple pretty interesting streaks. I think that's kind of an interesting point. Rick Alarcon, I hope I pronounced that correctly, says that Claxton would thrive in the surrounding cast coming in, best to him at the next level. And I think that's well said on both accounts. I do think Claxton could have thrived here. I also think that if you have a reasonable chance of being a first-round pick, that's a really hard thing to say no to. That's 4 years' worth of NBA money. That's life-changing. And you can say, well, if you came back, you might have positioned yourself to be in the lottery. I'm honestly not sure that's a risk I would take. If I had a good chance of being, a draft pick right now, that's the kind of thing that could impact future generations of your family. So kind of cool to see him saying that. J.J. McMillan says that Evans said that Texas wasn't going to win a national title anytime soon. That's a strong statement, and I would imagine that for the folks who are Longhorns fans, or I guess to a certain extent Aggies fans, to see Evans not include either of those two teams in his top five, I would imagine that's a pretty big deal in the state of Texas. I guess one of the things I'd be a little curious about at some point in time is there something that one of those teams can do to kind of get back in there with him? Because after all, top fives are not binding referendums. We see, in lots of instances, the actual school that gets chosen sometimes not necessarily reflected by the top 5, and we see guys who are supposedly committed release top 5s. There's a guy the other day that released a top 5. I forget who it was, but he was a committed player who released a top 5, and the school that he was committed to was not among his top 5. So, sometimes these top 5s can be a little weird, but obviously not seeing Texas or Texas A&M in that grouping, I think made you feel a little bit better as a Georgia fan. One of the things that I'm hoping to do maybe this week is I'm going to try to reach out to somebody kind of from Big 12 country, because I'd like to kind of find out, where Oklahoma is coming from all this kind of stuff, because you've heard these connections between Oklahoma and Seth McGowan. Zachary Evans lists Oklahoma as a finalist. At one point in time, Kendall Milton was thinking that way. When it comes to this area, Evans is the Texas guy, but it may be Oklahoma that's kind of holding the cards on kind of where all this goes next. And because if you really look at it, of the elite backs, you've got McGowan somewhat linked to Oklahoma. If that happens, you wonder, well, does that exclude Zachary Evans from that discussion? And then, does one of these guys end up at LSU? Because, right now both Milton and Evans have LSU listed as a finalist. Does one of these guys end up at Georgia? And it's almost like you've got this musical chairs going on where the same schools seem to be in the mix for the top running backs, and kind of how all do they fall into place. I think that's kind of an interesting thing worth paying attention to. All right, let's see. Let's see what else is going on here on Facebook. Johnny Webster says, as long as we get Evans or Milton, we're fine. Let me get the rest of this comment. All right, Mike is ready to go. Let me finish this comment. We'll get Mike on the phone here. Basically, he says, as long as we get Evans or Milton, we're fine. We don't need to get both. And certainly that would be a big one for Georgia, because I think both these guys are very impressive-looking running backs. So really good stuff. We'll have more comments hopefully later on. Also, some interesting stuff from Nick Saban coming up. He had kind of a weird thing to say about Tua Tagovailoa this week. So we'll do all that. But for now, from Destin, Florida, Mike Griffith is good enough to share some of his time with us.
From Athens and across the SEC or wherever the recruiting trail may lead, here's a DawgNation.com insider.
SEC spring meetings going on in Destin, Florida right now. Mike Griffith from DawgNation has been the center of it all. And Mike, we appreciate you being with us and joining us here today. And, it was your question to Kirby Smart that had us talking on our program a few minutes ago before you joined us about the notion that Georgia, Florida, what the future of this series is going to be. And boy, hearing Kirby talk yesterday, he really left that door open for a change. I don't know that it's right to speculate too much about what he meant by that, but boy, people are going to do some speculating nonetheless when he says nothing's been decided and everything's on the table. How did you take what Smart had to say yesterday?
Yeah, I think Kirby's been hinting at that for a while, BA. I thought, last season, he talked about it a little bit. And look, nobody's more of a Georgia Bulldog than Kirby Smart. There's nobody, let's make no mistake about it, there is nobody that loves the University of Georgia more and wants the best for that school more than Kirby Smart. He's as Georgia Bulldog as it gets, man. And, what Kirby's trying to do is win championships. And there's such a fine line. All we got to do is just think about these last two Alabama games. There is such a fine line between winning and losing. We're talking about one play, not just one player. One player can make 4 or 5 plays. We're talking about one play in 2 games that has made all the difference in the world. And if it comes down to a recruiting weekend standing between Georgia and a national championship, then Kirby's got to do what he thinks is in his best interest. Now, the argument that I hear, and I think it's a good one, is, well, it looks like Georgia's doing just fine with that game being played in Jacksonville, and that is fair to say. But I think Kirby looks at it as, why is Georgia punting one of the best recruiting weekends every other year when Alabama and Tennessee aren't, and LSU and Alabama aren't, and Tennessee and Florida aren't? Georgia is missing out by not having that home game. And now that we're looking at this future scheduling with home and home, we're talking about taking yet another game away from Stanford Stadium, BA. And I guess if there was one more point I'd want to make on something I was thinking about this week when I was talking with Duan Mathis, his father, Terrence, his father couldn't say enough about the treatment that his son got, not just from Kirby Smart and the staff, but from Piedmont Hospital. And, when you've got a medical center, and Athens has a couple really good ones, by the way. St. Mary's is also very good. But when you start talking about a city's infrastructure, part of that is the money that they get from taxes, and part of it is the money they get from football. The fact that Georgia has a world-class medical facility like Piedmont, that really made a difference in that kid's life. And that's going to make a difference in recruiting. And you think to yourself, what else could Athens do with another $4 to $6 million of economic impact every other year? And it really kind of all goes together. And it was kind of my observation and take on that.
So let me follow up on that because I think there's a lot to unpack for that. First of all, I'm a big believer that when it comes to Georgia, Florida, and Jacksonville, that it's not a disadvantage on the field for Georgia to play that game there. And, Mike, as painful as it was for me as a fan to live through the 90s and the early 2000s in which Georgia just had no luck in this series whatsoever, even back then I was the one saying Georgia's not losing these games because it's in Jacksonville. So I agree with you that if there's a motivation to change this, it's about what you could gain from recruiting by having that additional marquee game to host recruits in Sanford Stadium. But this is not for me about making it more fair because I don't believe the game being played in Jacksonville is unfair to Georgia. However, the one thing I also said before you joined us is I think there are good arguments to be made on both sides of this discussion. If I put a really smart Georgia fan on one side of my desk who said this game needs to be in Athens every other year because of recruiting, that's a strong argument. But if I put another fan on the other side of the desk who said this game needs to be in Jacksonville every year because it's one of the unique special traditions in all of college football and it's fun for tens upon tens of thousands of UGA fans, I think that's a pretty strong argument too. I don't know that there's a villain in this discussion. I don't know that there's a losing argument for Georgia. For me, this is about deciding about the best among two pretty good outcomes. Would you agree with that assessment?
I would absolutely agree with that assessment, and I totally understand. The people that support this game being in Jacksonville are very passionate about that, and the University of Georgia is very sensitive to that. I just had a conversation with Greg McGarity in the hall. Boy, does he work out, by the way. If you wonder how that guy stays so slim, that guy really sweats and pushes it. But I just ran into him down here, and it is what it is. I mean, he understands all the dynamics in every angle, and of course, Greg McGarry is a guy that enjoys that game being, in Jacksonville. I'm not saying that's the side he's taken, because I think right now Greg McGarry is kind of on the Kirby wagon. I think it's really about a university that's standing behind their football coach and trying to get behind what Kirby thinks is best for the program. I mean, he's the one that's led Georgia to the doorstep of the national championship in consecutive years. So to your point, it is about what's doing best for Georgia. But I'll say this, and with all due respect to tradition, I mean, I remember when they worked on the Masters, when they changed the course around a little bit. It's still the Masters, right?
Yeah.
But things change, and evolution, as you and I both know, in all walks of life, requires a change. And it's not to say that it damages the program. If it's done properly, it enhances the program. And for what it's worth, and I know a lot of people look at me and say, Mike, you've only been covering Georgia for a year. We've got this tradition. But, guys, I've been to the Swamp a lot, and I'm going to tell you, I like that road trip. I like going in that stadium. I think it's fun. It's loud. It's energetic, and the energy is through the roof. Frankly, it's a better game day environment than Jacksonville in terms of the excitement. Now, as far as the parties and the things in the ocean right next, Gainesville doesn't compare in that respect. I can tell you that. You're not going to have the same poolside and bar side drinks and ocean, but in terms of game day environment and the electricity in the stadium, doesn't compare. The Swamp is one of the top 3 or 4 venues in the SEC.
So let me ask you a very blunt question before we change the subject and talk about something different. Does Kirby Smart have enough political power in Athens right now to get this change? Because Matt Hayes says, the longtime college football writer, that Georgia makes more money by playing the game in Jacksonville. Now, let's just take him at his word for a moment for the sake of argument. Let's say it is more lucrative to keep the game in Jacksonville. If Kirby Smart wants the change, does he have enough political capital to get this change, or does he have to win a national championship first?
Yeah, and Matt's right, and we've written that. Matt's sitting next to me in the media room, and we talked about it yesterday. But if I recall, I'm tapping back into my conversations with McGarity about this last fall when we talked about this. I want to say it works out to every 2 years, like $3.1 million more. So if you want to prorate that, the University of Georgia makes $1.5 million more. Obviously, the city of Athens loses everything, and the city of Jacksonville benefits to some of the collateral finances involved with this. Athens doesn't, Georgia doesn't get a chance to enhance its partner city. Does Kirby have the? I don't know that. I don't know the answer to that question. I wish I could answer it. I know the contract goes through 2021. To me, it's Mullen and Kirby right now laying the groundwork for the potential for that game to move. Jacksonville can always up the ante, which I'm sure they will. But at the end of the day, it comes down to, Georgia fans have to ask themselves, do you want to keep pumping your money into the Florida economy, or do you want to keep it in state and pump it into Athens? Because that's the net result. And do you want to give your coach another recruiting weekend every other year to maybe land that one or two players? Who knows? If it's one or two players, as I said, these last two seasons, it's come down to one play. Mm-hmm. You can point to one play the last 2 years they played Alabama, so if Georgia makes that play, they might be a national champion. And one player can make that play, so that weekend could make a difference.
Yeah, that's a fair point. Let me transition to a different topic. You mentioned Duan Mathis a moment ago. That's obviously a potentially very scary situation, and yet you still had very good reporting on it. You got a chance to talk to Terrence Mathis a couple of times. Duan Mathis' father, as people are aware of now, Mathis underwent brain surgery to remove a cyst last week. Mike, what's your overall takeaway on all of this after hearing Kirby yesterday on the subject of Mathis, speaking to Mr. Mathis a couple of times? It seems like with Mathis now out of the hospital, we're heading towards what hopefully is going to be a happy ending here. But my gosh, how scary this could have been. And my heart really goes, because I got kids and you do too. My heart goes out to the Mathis family, knowing they were 800 miles away from their son while he was going through an incredibly serious procedure. I can only imagine how harrowing that must have been.
Well, remarkable is my reaction to it. If it wasn't for the sinus pressure, they don't find the cyst. It turned out to be the best headache he'd ever had, and it was a severe sinus pressure on account of the climate change. When he went back to Michigan after the conclusion of spring drills and the spring semester, went back for a couple of weeks. He came back on May 13th, BA, and obviously the heat in Athens has been pretty intense these last couple of weeks, and that climate change triggered sinus reaction and sinus pressure. And this is where, if you're a Georgia fan, you got to tip your cap to the Georgia medical staff and Ron Corson on that staff. You take those guys for granted. You take those team doctors and trainers for granted, and you want to just pretend that they're all the same, but they're not. And Georgia has maybe the best on the globe. I looked at Ron, and he's a guy that he worked in 3 Olympics. He's written a book on these topics. I mean, so when a kid comes into the training room with a headache, let's be honest, a lot of places are going to give him 2 aspirin and tell him to take a nap. Georgia is all over it. Georgia rushes him to ER. They recognize that this is not just a headache. They take the kid at his word, and they take him to ER. He gets an MRI. They discover this cyst, and they have to operate immediately. Piedmont is one of the top 1,000 hospitals in the world. It is one of only 7 Georgia hospitals on that list. So he has a world-class facility. He has a world-class training staff to deduce this. They take him to Piedmont. It's a world-class facility. They're able to, deduce from this MRI that the surgery has to be performed immediately. Kirby Smart handles this personally. I'm going to divulge something on the show, a detail that I've left out. When they called the family, okay, Terrence Mathis is getting out of the hospital today. He himself has been in the hospital while all this is going on. They call him, and not Georgia, by NCAA rules, they are allowed to provide transportation. Not only did they provide transportation, Kirby Smart saw to it that they had a personal escort from the Atlanta airport to Athens. Kirby Smart has been at the head of this train the entire process. Him and Ron Corson has been the liaison to Piedmont. Georgia has handled this in a fashion that has literally brought Terrence Mathis to tears. He has told me that the way this has been handled has humbled him and his family. He can't believe it. He can't believe the world-class doctors and experts and specialists that were on hand immediately. He can't believe the personal phone calls, all the visits that James Coley's made to the hospital. He says his son is being treated not like an incoming freshman that they're just getting to know, but he says Kirby Smart has treated his son as though he were his own child. And every time I talk to him, BA, you see the quotes, but you don't see is the part where he says, Mike, make sure you get this in there. Mike, make sure you tell the Georgia fans we appreciate their prayers. Mike, make sure you tell DawgNation we know they're there for us, and it means everything. He's telling me, make sure you put this in the story. They are so thankful and appreciative that Georgia has handled this in this world-class manner. And that's why the whole, pumping money into Athens, that's why it clicked to me, BA. That's why it matters, because it matters what your ambulance service is. It matters who your firefighters are. It matters what your streets are like. And Athens is such a tremendous community, and they were there to answer the bell for Duan Mathis, and Kirby Smart was there. And that's so when I say remarkable, this story truly has been remarkable.
That's great to hear, Mike. Thanks for telling that story. As far as everything else that's gone on at Destin, Florida, what else has stood out to you from what you heard from Kirby? I know you've got some stuff coming up at DawgNation.com in the days ahead about the other things he had to say. Anything else kind of get your attention from Smart's remarks yesterday?
Yeah, my big picture, and I kind of wrote a Nick Saban story on it because I asked Nick Saban directly. I mean, let's say he's the dean of the SEC coaches. He's the guy with the vision. I put it together, BA, and you do your show. Look, what are we talking about here? We're talking about the potential for alcohol sales. That's going to go in front of the president, right, to vote on. The potential for alcohol sales. We know there's a committee that's been put together to pay players more for the use of their likeness. So we're talking about paying players. We know that the aggressive scheduling is in response to anticipation of expanded playoffs. We've talked about the transfer portal, which amounts to restricted free agency. Let's put that together real quick. Alcohol, paying players, free agency, and playoffs. What does that all add? That sounds like the NFL, for goodness sake. And so I asked Saban, where do we got to go to protect the college game? And Saban didn't get too far into it, but he did say this is in the entertainment industry. So the one thing I would say to fans, and I would say to you, you're a master at your show and your ideas, and I would love to hear what your response is to this, is how far do we go before we're turning college football into pro football? And where do we draw the line as far as, what changes we're making to the game? Because before long, it's going to look exactly like pro football's minor league instead of the college football game that we've come to know and love.
Yeah, I mean, there's no doubt that changes that are coming in college football are seemingly coming for good reasons, and yet sometimes even good reasons are also attached with unintended consequences. And I think we're already seeing that with some of the recently instituted stuff, maybe the transfer portal, for instance, that sometimes positive changes also include unintended outcomes.
No doubt, and that's why I say we have to be careful what we wish for. And I know the alcohol in stadiums issue, I know it's a convenience for fans, but, as someone who's, been in NFL stadiums and college stadiums, I'll tell you, Sanford Stadium to me is one of the friendliest stadiums in the country. And I just, it's not that it would necessarily go bad. It's not like everybody is going to abuse the privilege. It's not like it's that some people don't use it now. But, I'm just such a big believer in don't mess, with success. And I look at what Georgia has. I mean, I'm invested, because I believe, I believe that what Georgia has is really special. I take a lot of heat, when I go on Feinbaum's show. And Paul knows this. He likes to put me in the corner and well, Mike, you think Georgia's better than Alabama this year. Well, why don't you tell us why? And I'll tell you why. Because they got a better offensive line. They can protect their quarterback. He's a third-year starter. And I think Georgia's, in the right place to do this. They've got an incredible level of buy-in with Kirby Smart, and they've got the continuity from promoting within, while Saban has had to change that. That's why. Now, sure, I'm going to get slammed by 85% of the people on Twitter that are Alabama fans and call me out. But, I know what I see, and I know what I feel, and I know what I believe. And maybe I've only covered Georgia for a year, BA, but I've covered college football for 26 years. And I can tell you that what Kirby Smart and Georgia and the city of Athens have going on is really special. And it's just, you don't see that combination very often. In fact, I don't know that I've ever seen a school put together, a town, a campus, and an academic rating like I've seen Athens and Georgia do. And that's kind of my thought, and I guess that lets you know where I fall in that whole home and home series and pumping money into that Athens economy.
Well, it's certainly an exciting time, Mike. We appreciate you being with us here today. Appreciate your coverage from Destin, Florida, as part of SEC spring meetings. We'll look forward to reading a whole bunch more from you at DawgNation.com and catch up with you back here again on DawgNation Daily very soon.
Thanks, BA.
Let's take a look around the rest of the league. This is SEC Through.
Yeah, interesting stuff on the future Georgia-Florida. I think it's really kind of it's an interesting time, and it's going to be interesting to see where it goes next. Let me transition to our SEC Through, and while we do, let me remind you about my friends at Kroger. You know, a lot of you are getting ready for a lot of summer travel and things like that. Well, as you're thinking about that summer travel, one of the things you also think about is how can you make this a little bit more cost efficient? Well, Kroger's got you taken care of on that. You can earn 3 times the fuel points right now on hundreds of items throughout the store. I'm talking about Kroger ice cream, bag and treats for your dogs, Hershey chocolate syrup, Red Bull, a whole lot more. Just got to look for those 3 times the fuel points tags on a lot of the aisles there, and you can start shopping and start saving. If you got travel coming up this summer, a little extra fuel, certainly savings doesn't hurt, and you can get that at your local Kroger, so I hope you will check that out. All right, something quite fascinating came from the SEC spring meetings yesterday, and it did not involve Georgia coach Kirby Smart. It instead involved Alabama coach Nick Saban. I'm going to go and try to read the comment here from Saban when it comes to his quarterback, Tua Tagovailoa. Now, listen carefully on this. He said, okay, here we go on the screen. It's Brett McMurphy on Twitter saying, Tua has to challenge himself to get back. Being hurt was an issue at the end of last season. He has to challenge himself to get back into great shape. He should take the perception he has a lot to prove, as do all of us, relative to how the season ended. That's an eye-opener, right? That's Nick Saban seemingly being critical of his quarterback, Tua Tagovailoa. What's ironic is Saban says that about Tua on the same day that one of the online betting houses just flipped the Heisman favorite and made Tua the favorite over Trevor Lawrence. So, I mean, Tua is still considered on the shortest of short lists for the best player in all of college football. But Nick Saban has some critical remarks, and specifically drawing a line between Tua's conditioning at the end of the season and how Alabama fared against Clemson in the national championship game. Really, in a lot of ways, echoing the thoughts of some Alabama fans. Alabama fans have not been, I don't want to say unkind to Tua this offseason, but Tua's gotten some criticism from Bama fans about the Clemson game. They didn't think he played great in the spring game, and we said this in the show not too long ago that we're kind of in the season of Tua doubters just a bit. He was praised all year last year, and there's nothing that the media, and I guess I'm probably included in this group, there's nothing that the media likes doing more than building you up and then eventually starting the process of tearing you down. And maybe we're seeing this when it comes to Tua, and maybe unwittingly Alabama coach Nick Saban is a part of this. Ultimately, though, what I think this is really about is I think that this is the anxiety creeping in with Nick Saban, because the one thing that he always uses is a quarterback competition. Remember, Saban is the master of, not only does he not name a quarterback after spring practice, he doesn't even name a starting quarterback at the end of summer practice. How many times have we seen his quarterback battle stretch into the season, where you have these random guys like Cooper Bateman starting games as Alabama quarterback in the month of September before Saban initially settles on the quarterback that's going to be his guy for that season. Saban is a guy that really believes that competition is what breeds success, and obviously the results speak for themselves. He's probably right about that. Unfortunately, right now, Alabama does not have a quarterback competition. There is no Jalen Hurts anymore. Mac Jones is a former pretty good recruit, one-time Kentucky commit. No one's going to confuse him with a player like Tua Tagovailoa. The other incoming freshman, Paul Tyson, Talia Tagovailoa, I personally think that both these guys are at least years away from being capable college players. So I think that Saban looks, and I think he sees a scenario where he's got nobody pushing Tua to be better, and so Saban's going to take it on himself to be the one to push Tua, which I think is kind of an interesting strategy. In fact, I'll go so far as to say this. It would not surprise me if eventually Kirby Smart does something similar with Jake Fromm. After all, it seems like right now that Fromm is a little bit like Tua, the quarterback who could sort of do no wrong. If there was a teacher's pet version of football player, Tua is Alabama's version of that. Fromm is probably Georgia's version of that. But now with no Justin Fields at Georgia, with no Jacob Eason at Georgia, maybe Kirby Smart's also afraid that there's no quarterback to push Fromm the way that Fromm was once pushing Eason, the way that last year was thought that Fields might push Jake. That guy does not seemingly exist in the Georgia roster right now because both Stetson Bennett and Duan Mathis, once he's healthy again, they both have some probably work to do to be ready to play at the SEC level. So listen carefully this summer. I'm not saying it will be as harsh as what Saban just said there about Tua, but listen for those moments in which Kirby Smart kind of also pushes Jake Fromm along. I think we're in a new era where the quarterback competitions of just a few years ago, those are going to be a lot more rare in college football, so coaches are going to have to do their part to manufacture this stuff somehow, and it wouldn't surprise me to see Smart at some point in time following Saban's footsteps on this. Let me do a couple more quick SEC stories before we move on here as well. I thought that Dan Mullen at the SEC spring meetings said something kind of interesting yesterday. The subject came up of possibly making the Miami series with the Gators. They're going to play in week 0 this year, like August the 20 whatever, the week before everybody else plays. He said he wouldn't mind seeing that become more of a regular occurrence, maybe even an annual occurrence. And the reason why I bring this up is I do think there's a pretty strong case to be made for, and this is true for Georgia as well, it's not just the trips out of region to play teams like Oklahoma and Texas. There's also some real value in playing regional non-conference opponents as well. And for Florida, that means Miami. That's an out-of-conference game in their own state, one that Florida over the years, frankly, has not played enough. And I think there's some value in playing that series more. But for Georgia, it's Clemson, it's Florida State, it's those non-conference games in your region where you have something to be gained in recruiting by maybe winning those games. I like the fact that these programs, even a team I hate like Florida, also sees the value in not just scheduling road trips, not just scheduling cross-country jaunts, but also scheduling some of those regional rivalries as well, because I think those are pretty fun too. And then finally, Darnell Washington, I'll call him a tight end. The recruiting services list him as an athlete. He releases his top 12 if you're watching on video. This is one of my favorite edits I've seen in quite some time because Washington from Vegas, get the Vegas kind of scenery in the background. There's a roulette wheel. There's some craps dice. There's the Las Vegas skyline. Now, you got to be 21 to get into a casino. Well, Washington's not old enough to do that, but he lives in Vegas, so you get the Vegas imagery here. And I don't know how much you take out of a top 12, but Georgia is included in that group. And Georgia right now, under Todd Hartley's leadership, is in the mix for Rick Gilbert and Darnell Washington. Theo Johnson's a name you're going to hear. We'll hear from him later on today on Before the Hedges, presented by Kroger. It's kind of an interesting time for Georgia tight end recruiting. They want at least 2 this year, it seems like, and they want to make sure that those 2 are among the best in the country. That should be fun to watch, and we'll make that your SEC through. All right, before we do our summer Q&A today, let me mention my friends at Merriweather and Tharp here, and I know this is a tough topic for many people. Really, the last thing a lot of people want to talk about is the so-called D word. You know, divorce is just kind of a rough topic to deal with, especially if you're going through it because it's painful and it's personal. And for a lot of people, it becomes the kind of thing you can't ignore anymore. You tried to maybe get out of the way of that, but it's going to eventually happen. And if you fail to prepare, that's planning to fail. Benjamin Franklin, of course, said that. That's why you want to trust my friends at Merriweather and Tharp to help prepare you to return your life back to normal and give you peace of mind and really secure your family's future. It's an important discussion, and it's one you want to have, starting with a free consultation with my friends at Merriweather and Tharp. Please find them online at theatlantadivorceteam.com. That's theatlantadivorceteam.com. All right, so I want to set up our summer Q&A here, and it sounds like we may have a chance to be on video a little longer today, maybe than I initially thought. So we'll do some of this on video, and also for our radio and podcast audience, we'll take your responses at DawgNation Daily on Twitter, or you can drop your comment in the comment section when we post the podcast at worldfamousdognation.com. I simply chose 2 questions today for a specific reason. I really want to continue this debate about Georgia-Florida. I thought that Mike Griffith had some interesting things to say about that a moment ago. And I want to talk more about Zachary Evans as well, and I don't want to cloud this debate here too much. So just 2 questions for our summer Q&A today. Should Georgia-Florida be played on campus? And is it realistic that Georgia could pull 5-star running back Zachary Evans out of Texas, the state of Texas, I mean, now that Evans has included UGA in his top 5? I'd love to hear from you on both of those topics. We'll do this for a bit here on the show, and then as a part of our video audience live after that, and then on Twitter throughout the rest of the day. So let me pop over to Facebook here for a moment. We will get a couple comments over here and see what folks are saying. Dustin Williams says, no, the game should not be played on campus. And he says, yes, it is realistic that Georgia can sign Zachary Evans. Bryce Dixon, who's a big Dog fan, also says keep the game in Jacksonville. However, J.J. McMillan says, yes, the game should be played on campus. Here's one of those things where I'm honestly not sure of right now. I, generally speaking, feel like I have a pretty good handle on the way that Georgia fans feel and think. I honestly don't know, though, if you did like a really substantial scientific survey. I don't know what the percentage of Georgia fans who want to keep the thing in Jacksonville versus the percentage of Georgia fans who'd want to play the game every other year in Athens. I'm not quite sure what that percentage split might be, but we'll take as many comments throughout the day here today to see if we can figure out. I'll also remind you to make sure you get your Atlanta news now at ajc.com, including check in on ajc.com. Now, you should do it throughout the day, but check in later on today after 6 p.m. There's going to be a press conference at SunTrust Park. The Atlanta Braves, I think, are on the verge of making a pretty big announcement today, and the AJC is going to have coverage of that. So AJC.com, the place to be this evening and every evening to keep up with your Atlanta news. Get Atlanta news now at AJC.com, including a pretty big announcement coming from the Braves later on today. All right, as we wrap up on our program and then get ready to do some video comments and have some fun after that, I'll mention a couple stories here. I talked on the video program a moment ago about Nicholas Claxton, the Georgia basketball star who has decided to keep his name in the NBA draft. Apparently, Claxton's gotten some assurances he'll be a first-round pick, so that's what he's going to do. And I think this is a bit of a lost opportunity for Georgia. Pairing a veteran with the incoming crop of freshmen, including the Ant-Man himself, Anthony Edwards, would have been an interesting thing to see. But best of wishes and best of luck to Claxton as he moves on. I'll also say, and I'm not posting the picture intentionally because I feel like there's so much skin in the photo, it's almost like a violation of privacy. But did you see the picture of Ben Cleveland that's been bouncing around on Twitter as of late? He looks like he could be main eventing WrestleMania. That's a pretty impressive physical condition that he finds himself in these days. By the way, speaking of the lousy, stinking Gators, 942 days, that's how long it's been since Florida's beaten Georgia. That's good news. We'll see you tomorrow here on DawgNation Daily. And on video. So there's this photo of Ben Cleveland that's been all over Twitter. And like I said, it's he and some young girl, and there's a lot of skin in the photo, generally speaking. So I didn't know if it was the kind of thing that we should post here on DawgNation Daily. We'll give them a little bit of privacy, but it certainly seems like Cleveland's enjoying his summer. I'll say that. And it certainly seems like Scott Sinclair's strength and conditioning program is working pretty well, too. And that's probably about all I need to say about that. So that's kind of a cool thing to see. By the way, R.S. Andrews Cool Down Now, air, heating, plumbing, electric. Y'all, it is hot. It is hot as blue blazes, as we used to say when I was growing up. And pity the fool whose air conditioning goes out this time of year. That is not a good situation. That's why we call this the R.S. Andrews Cool Down. Because much like the image on your screen of that thermostat going down and getting cool, that's what you want. If your home is hot, you're not sleeping, it's just a bad situation. So trust my friends at R.S. Andrews, rsandrews.com. Have them come out. They'll take care of you, and they will make sure that air conditioning starts doing what it's supposed to do, which is pumping out that cold air again. Mike Anderson says, as we start traveling more for the big out-of-conference games, let's put the Florida game on campus. And I think that Mike is right to draw the connection between those two. And Mike Griffith also kind of mentioned this a moment ago, that when you are going around the globe playing these non-conference games, it becomes a very tough needle to thread to also have Florida on a neutral site every single year and also play a game against Georgia Tech where every other year you lose that home game there as well. Georgia's a little unique in that regard. Oklahoma, Texas is not really that way. Now, we're getting into an era now where Oklahoma and Texas are about to start playing non-conference games every single year. But Oklahoma's in-state rival is Oklahoma State. It's a conference game. They have to play that game. It's dictated by conference. Texas doesn't play its in-state rival anymore, but if it did, when that was the Big 12, that was a conference deal. Georgia plays Georgia Tech, playing Florida on a neutral site, and then also traveling around the planet to play these non-conference games. At a certain point in time, it just may get logistically tough to play Georgia, Florida, and Jacksonville. However, I am still a bit of a adherent to tradition, at least for right now, and I'm not really looking to see that change as of yet. Neil Adams says once Evans sees that picture of Ben Cleveland, he may call Kirby Smart and commit. I believe that Connor Riley's microphone is on, unless I'm hearing correctly.
I understand where people are coming from when they say the whole, the travel expenses. What about the people in South Georgia who, for a large segment of them, it is a lot easier for them to make Jacksonville their home game that they can go to and that they can get to that time of year.
I think it's a great argument. And let me be clear about one thing. When I said it may get logistically tough, I don't mean travel expenses for fans. I mean you may catch yourself in a bind where it gets hard to even have 6 home games on those years when you got Tech in Atlanta, Florida and Jacksonville, and Oklahoma and Norman, or whatever thing you want to predict. It may get hard to even have 6. Most teams want 7. Some of these goofy teams have played as many as 8, I think. But you may get into a spot where you may only have 6, or you may have a year where even scheduling a 6th becomes tough. That's what I mean when it comes to the logistical toughness of this. But Connor's point about the geography of Georgia is a good one. Georgia is the largest state. I'm talking about landmass-wise. It's the largest state east of the Mississippi. So when you think about living in Valdosta, living in Savannah, living in Waycross, living in these areas down there, Georgia, Florida is your home game. And listen, there are a lot of good dogs down there. I do respect the idea that's the one game every year where they get to drive to and then get to drive home after it's over with. These poor folks that do the Athens trip 6 times a year from down in South Georgia like that. That's a hard deal. That's a dedicated level of fandom to be making that long trip up to Athens. It's just not easy. And then any other SEC road trip for them becomes a real challenge. So we got a lot of folks that listen to us from South Georgia, especially some of those towns that I just mentioned. I love the idea of giving them that one big game every year that's close to where they live. It's become popular over the last couple of years to call it Jacksonville, Georgia anyway. I vacation near there every single year. Trust me, there are a lot of folks in and around that First Coast area that do not think of themselves as living in Florida, even though that's what their driver's license say. There are a lot of folks who think of that area as just sort of an annexation of Georgia as it is. Willie Gray Jr. says season ticket holders are the one that takes this worse than anyone. We lose a home game for our donation. Willie, that's also a good point. And Connor, would you at least acknowledge that if you are a season ticket holder who goes to the 6 home games and you don't travel to the away games because of whatever, you just go to the 6 home games, the same way that the South Georgia guy says, hey, don't take this game away from me, the season ticket holder, and these things get more expensive every year. The season ticket holder says, you're withholding a game from me that I ought to get as a season ticket holder. That's what I said off the top of the program. I don't think there's a villain in this argument. I think what Willie mentions, I think that's a very fair point.
The season ticket holder point, with the exception of, I guess, 1995, at no point in your history of being a Georgia fan have you ever got this game as a home game. Like, it's never been a thing. So,
but I think it's fair for a guy like Willie to say, and now I'm tired of that. I think it's a fair point.
Okay, so why now then? Just because Kirby has started talking about the recruiting aspects of it. Where was this argument when Richt was at Georgia? I know he was there early on in the days, but I'm talking about in the later years where it didn't seem that Richt.
I definitely think the fact that Smart is giving a wink to those people has definitely opened it up. There was some of this back then,
right? Yeah, in the very early days in the tenure.
But I think the fact that Smart seems open to it has galvanized the people who probably feel that way too. But we're also in a day and age now that's different than the Richt era or the Don and Goff Dooley era, in that it used to be that no one questioned season tickets. Everybody just bought them. We're in a time now where around the country, people are questioning, why am I doing this? I mean, what people who don't buy season tickets might not realize is, the most mediocre Georgia games in the world still cost season ticket holders about $100 per game. Yep. Once you factor in everything else, I'm talking about Austin Peay last year, Murray State this year, to a guy like Willie Gray, who's apparently a season ticket holder. That Austin Peay or Murray State game cost him $100, $100 to go to. And all of a sudden now, people are saying, wait, is it a good deal to be a season ticket holder? Even if I spent $400 or $500 on tickets to go to the Notre Dame game, could I just get off cheaper by buying my tickets week to week? All of a sudden now, the value of season tickets, I think, is being questioned more. And I think one of the things that Georgia may need to, at one point, consider, even though I'm in favor of the cocktail party, one of the things that Georgia might one day need to consider is, are they giving enough value to their season ticket holder?
I mean, yes, as long as they're continuing to compete for national titles.
I don't know. I mean, I think about Kentucky basketball in this regard. So Kentucky basketball always competes for national titles. But the biggest games are not played in Lexington. They're played in St. Louis. They're played in Indianapolis. They're played in whatever. And so, I mean, I've had people tell me that it's almost like two different fan bases. You get the fan base that goes to games in Lexington at Rupp Arena. You get the fan base that goes to Nashville, the SEC tournament, and wherever the NCAA tournament's being played. I mean, I think even for a national championship level program, in other words, I think there's still a desire to see good home games. I mean, Connor, we've heard a lot of complaints in the last year about the Georgia home schedule. That has nothing to do with whether or not Georgia's winning or not. I think that there are a lot of Georgia fans who I hear right now questioning the value of the ticket.
I mean, yeah, but that's not, an issue that is unique to Georgia. I think, as the home entertainment systems get better and better, I think there are a lot of people who see and understand, why am I going to fork over, $600, $700, $100 plus whatever fee you have to pay just to get into the season ticket holder sort of lot. It's something that isn't just a unique Georgia issue, but I do wonder, is adding Florida as a home game really going to make that many people more want to buy season tickets that aren't already buying season tickets?
I think if they can position it so the game takes place in odd-numbered years, I think that changes the Georgia scheduling dramatically. Because right now you've got Auburn, Georgia Tech, and Tennessee in even-numbered years, and you really don't have a permanent odd-numbered year opponent. You've got South Carolina, I guess, but that's not as big a game to Georgia fans as it is for South Carolina fans. You don't have that marquee rival odd-numbered year opponent. So if you could say in 2023, for instance, Georgia's going to play Florida in Athens that year, regardless of your out-of-conference scheduling, because that's about to start really being a whole different animal altogether. But if you could say in alternate years you get Auburn at home and then the other year you get Florida at home, I think that increases the year-to-year value of those season tickets. I do. Now, Georgia fans may tell me that it doesn't. I do. And let me also say that I'm not arguing in favor of making the change. In my heart, I kind of don't want to do it. I kind of want to keep the game in Jacksonville. All I'm saying is the people who are arguing the other side of this, I think, have a fairly convincing case to be made.
Can I tell them why they're wrong? And not specifically the Georgia fans, because I do understand the argument of, the home and home and whatnot. But today there was a tweet saying if this game's moved out of Jacksonville, it would, destroy the tradition of college football, which is being destroyed more and more each day, which I think is a little hyperbolic. But there are a lot of national media people now questioning, why is this played in Jacksonville every year? And they say, college football is better because it is, sort of this home and homes and games on campuses just tend to be better. This game is not Auburn and Oregon playing in Dallas. This game is not Louisville and Alabama playing in Orlando. This is a true 50-50 split. This is not your traditional run-of-the-mill neutral site game where you're struggling to fill seats. This stadium is packed to the gills every year. 50% Georgia fans on one side, 50% Florida fans and their dorks on the other side. Some have said, what's the big deal about Jacksonville? This game has been played in Jacksonville since the 1930s. Yeah. Some 60 years before the Jacksonville Jaguars ever became a joke of a franchise that they are. Mm-hmm. So, I think the image in the city of Jacksonville's, image because of the unfortunate pro football team that they've had stationed there for the past 25 years now has maybe made people look down on Jacksonville. But Jacksonville has been an important site to this rivalry game for decades. Yeah. Decades and decades.
I think it's a very fair point.
And as much as, people like to talk about the actual in-game football stuff and the recruiting stuff around it, every year for as far as I can remember, Georgia has had their fall break before the Georgia-Florida game so that the students can go down and travel to Jacksonville. Oftentimes, Thursday nights, the night before, they go down to whatever beach they like to choose, St. Simon's, Amelia, Sea Island, wherever beach they like to locate at, and pop up and have a very good time there. And and there are traditions like that on the Florida side. I know one of the highlights we had this year was when we went down to the King and Prince Resort. Yeah. Had a couple of great shows. Went to Southern Soul Barbecue. Fantastic time.
Amazing time.
Removing the game from Jacksonville takes all those traditions out of it just as well. I think that is something that what makes this game special. It isn't just the football game. It is all the other stuff around the football game in and of itself. It is, and I'm a big, journey over destination guy. It is making that car ride. One of the things I think about often is, over the course of the year is, that car ride back from Jacksonville, whether it's a win or a loss, because when it's a win, it's the best car ride in the world.
Yep.
And when it's a loss, it is absolutely terrible.
Yeah.
And I have some true horror stories after some losses, specifically after the 2015 game.
I think those are all very, very strong and very fair points.
And I just think, bottom line, I understand wanting the home and home and the recruiting stuff. And I'm sorry I can't see your comments. I'm working on getting Brandon's podcast up right now. This game has to stay in Jacksonville.
I think it's interesting that you feel as strongly about it as you do.
And I didn't always feel this way. I didn't for a long time. I didn't quote-unquote get it. But I would just encourage everyone to take the chance and opportunity, if you are able to go to Jacksonville and be in that environment and be there for a Georgia win and just sit in the stands for another 15, 20 minutes after the game is over and celebrating. Just go do that. And then come talk to me and try and say how much this would matter more or less if it was in Athens or in Jacksonville.
Jacksonville's a little bit of an ugly city, but there's a beautiful view of Jacksonville when you're near the top of the stadium, when the game is over and the sun is setting around the stadium. It is the kind of image that does not leave my mind very easily, and I do respect the traditions that Connor cites there, and I think that a lot of people agree with what he's saying, and I, for the most part, mostly agree with him. And yet, I think there's still a strong case to be made on the other side. Now, one of the things that Ro Hawkins and Steve Harmon also bring up in our comment section is, what about the idea of the rotation? What about the idea of Athens, Gainesville, Jacksonville, kind of the three-city loop for this thing? I could be wrong about this, and I have nothing to base this on other than my own supposition. I kind of think, though, that if you ever took this game out of Jacksonville every year, I don't think you can go back every third year. I think people just stop. I think the tradition
I would agree with that.
is built on the notion you keep doing it every year. For the people who stay in the condominiums, it's the same condominium booking every year. It's the same, it's same restaurants every year. Connor mentioned one a moment ago. Once it's every third year, all of a sudden that becomes the year you skip and just stay home. I think that Jacksonville as a destination is destroyed once they don't do it every year anymore. But like I said, that's just my guess. I think it's a somewhat educated guess. Connor, before you get busy and get back to work again, let me ask you two more quick questions. So as a former student and as a guy who wasn't that long ago in your student life, what percentage of students do you think would prefer the game be in Jacksonville compared to Athens?
I would say the younger crowd, the under 27, 28 crowd, I would say I'd venture to guess maybe set at least 75%, if not more.
That's interesting. That's a very high number. What about people my age? I'm 42.
I actually
been doing
think
this
the
thing
older
for a
crowd
while. Please don't call it the older crowd.
It is not the older crowd, but the crowd where, expenses are a little bit more of a concern and, budgeting and things like that, just because you have so many other life things going on in your life. I do think that number is maybe a little bit closer to 50%.
Yeah, I'm starting to get the sense of that too. And I think 50-50 is a very interesting place for that debate to be. I do. Will Marlowe also notices the older crowd. That's a dagger to my heart, Will. Dagger to my heart. All right, let's see what's going on YouTube. Bulldog Chris says, BA, every other year we're the home team in Jacksonville. Why not push to let home team host recruits? The recruits can travel with the team to get the experience of playing an away game with the Dogs. So here's something else that I kind of believe emphatically, Chris, that the issue for Georgia is not the agreement not to host recruits. I honestly don't believe there's a ton of value in hosting recruits in Jacksonville, because what sells Georgia is not Sanford Stadium, while that's part of it. It's the whole deal. It's the campus, it's the downtown, it's everything else. That the Athens experience is such a big coup for Georgia. As cool as the Jacksonville experience is to the average recruit, I don't think that's going to speak to them quite as strongly as what's going to happen in Athens, the place they're going to live for, something close to 52 weeks out of a year. So that's really what you're taking away. And, when I was on the radio guys this morning, they said, well, yeah, but it hasn't hurt Georgia in getting the recruits that it's gotten, and that's true. But in some cases, to the folks who would say the recruiting part of this matters, you kind of don't know what you're missing when it comes to not being able to have that week to host those recruits. I mean, listen, Jeff Sintel will tell you, Darnell Washington is likely coming to Georgia for his official visit on the Notre Dame game. Kendall Milton is likely coming to Georgia for his official visit on the Notre Dame game. There are other recruits that names escape me right now who've also probably said, I think Jalen Kimber is coming for his official visit on the Notre Dame game.
Kimber, I believe, is already taken.
All right, then maybe he's coming back for an unofficial in the Notre Dame game. Maybe that's you are right. He did take his official for back in the spring when he committed. But anyway, we're not even to June yet. We've already got a list growing of expected visitors for the Notre Dame game. That's the end of September. But Alabama's playing nobody. Clemson's playing nobody, and everybody wants to be in Athens to see a pretty big somebody take on another pretty big somebody. That's just such a huge, huge weapon. And in this age of silent commits and, a lot of insiders believing they know where some of these guys are going to end up, it doesn't matter that much for them. But could you have gotten Darnell Wright on campus last year had Georgia been playing Florida in October? Could you have gotten, Darnell Wright on campus this year? I'm talking about a guy that was notorious for not visiting when sometimes he thought he might, and seemingly that visit never happened to Georgia. Could another marquee home game have made that visit more likely? Georgia didn't really have one of those last year, did it?
Auburn, I would say Auburn was a pretty marquee home game.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I don't know. Yeah, you're absolutely right. You're 100% right. I'm just totally blacked out the fact that game even happened, I guess. But yeah, Auburn was definitely a marquee game. The overall point, though, is there are going to be some recruits who are on the fence about taking even unofficial visits, just driving down to watch a game, but you're playing a good team. They are likely to come.
And
let me read Scott Harris's comment. He says, "We can host recruits on St. Simon's before the game. Guaranteed they'll choose UGA."
There you go.
I'm not quite so sure that's what the NCAA wants you doing, Scott. But I like the energy of your thought process. What are you about to say?
I mean, I as much as Kirby Smart does like to talk up the recruiting aspect, and I understand it, Georgia is still signed. They are the only school in the country that can say this. They have signed a top 3 class in each of the last.
Yeah, so I mean, it's whatever they're doing still working. You're right about that. You are right about that. So one more on this, and I want to take some more comments. Do you agree with me that as of right now, if it's more money on one side, Kirby Smart on the other, for now, Kirby still loses in that debate?
As of right now, yes. As of today, May 29th.
And I find that to be kind of fascinating. I find it to be kind of fascinating that he's collected a lot of political capital, but maybe not quite enough political capital to do this yet. I find that to be pretty interesting. Eddie Hackney says, "Hell with tradition. Let's start a new tradition of winning championships by way of Athens and Gainesville. Go Dogs." And yeah, Eddie, a lot of folks would love to see that become true. Georgia Peach also says Notre Lame, and I like Mrs. Georgia Peach doing that. Good to have her checking in on the program. Look at a South Carolina fan checking in on YouTube. Boy, there must be a good day in South Carolina when all of a sudden you got South Carolina fans checking in. He says, y'all can't get all the damn running backs. So we have really reached a new height here on DawgNation Daily. I believe if you have your DawgNation Daily troll bingo card out, you can fill in the South Carolina space, because I don't know that we've had one of those before. I'm not quite so sure. For sure. Let me go back over to Facebook. Miriam Martin Corbin says, "This, quote, older crowd person loves to go anywhere my dogs are." And Miriam, I like that sentiment as well. Mike Anderson seems to agree too. And Kenneth Wiggins says, "There aren't many like you." Well, there are still a lot. However, and Miriam can tell you this, and Steve Shaffini joked in our Facebook comment section earlier that he's still paying off the Georgia Notre Dame game from 2017. It has certainly been interesting to watch Georgia fandom be tested financially as much as it has been the last couple of years, and as much as it likely will be in the years to come. This is the time, though, that a lot of folks have been, saving up for and living up for. Neil Adams says, "Changing gears if possible," and it's probably about time for a gear change, Neil. I appreciate that. He says, "Evans and Milton as a duo." So I have kind of a crackpot theory that I think this is more possible than some people might think. But it is based on wild speculation. So ultimately, is it okay to just sort of speculate out loud about this?
Yeah.
Ultimately, I think
reckless speculation.
This is reckless speculation. Ultimately, I think Paris Johnson's going to stay at Ohio State.
I will say he does not end up at Georgia. I could see him at LSU.
See, I think the LSU thing's a smokescreen. I think so. A lot of this depends on the fact that I believe that Johnson's not going to LSU. So follow these dominoes. Let's say that Johnson's just kind of having some fun with his recruitment, and when it's all said and done, the Cincinnati product goes where Cincinnati products who are 5 stars usually do go, which is Ohio State. So all of a sudden now, there's not as much conceivable reason for a guy like Kendall Milton to be considering LSU because they just signed 2 really good running backs. I don't think they have a lot of great offensive linemen waiting to fold there. All of a sudden now, why would Milton go to LSU? They've got running backs. They may not have enough offensive linemen. There's not a lot of action when it comes to guys he's friends with on that class. That to me leads Milton back in the the realm of Georgia where a lot of people think he's going anyway. What if Zachary Evans already knows Kendall Milton's going to Georgia and put Georgia as one of his finalists anyway?
I don't know about that. That seems a bit much.
I mean, how many times do you see MJ Sherman and Keely Ringo, really more Sherman than Ringo, I guess, but how many times is MJ Sherman talking to Kendall Milton on Twitter? That's got to matter. That's got to matter to a certain extent.
I understand wanting to get excited about the possibility of having the number 1 running back, number 3 running back.
Don't mischaracterize. I'm not getting excited about the possibility. I'm suggesting it is a possibility.
I did note it is interesting that 4 of the 5 finalists for Evans, Georgia, Alabama, Ohio State, and LSU are the same 4 finalists for Milton. The only difference is Oklahoma, who already has another 5-star running back currently committed. And I also noted that, people were really taken back by Evans not having Texas and Texas A&M in his top, 5 finalists. Do you know how many running backs Texas A&M and Texas have produced in the last 5 years that have been top 50 picks in the NFL draft?
Was Travion Williams a top 50 pick last year?
He was the number 189.
Oh, my God.
The answer is 0. Do you know what all 5 of Evans' finalist schools have in common?
They've been doing that.
They have a top 50 running back pick in the last 5 years.
That's a good stat. I mean, I'm hearing a lot of people on the Facebook comment section think that Milton's a quote-unquote silent commitment to Georgia. I don't know how much I even believe in silent commitments, but if there was ever a possibility to be one, I think Milton would be a possibility to be one. And if Evans already knows that and still included Georgia in his finalists, I find that to be interesting. I do find that to be interesting.
I will push back.
Especially, well, let me just finish with this.
Yep.
Especially given the fact that there are a lot of people who think that Seth McGowan's already linked to Oklahoma, that LSU just signed a lot of running backs, and I don't really know how Alabama factors into all of this. I just find it to be kind of interesting, but now you can push back however you want to.
Kendall Milton shows a lot of LSU love for someone who is supposedly quote unquote in the eyes of fans and LSU or a Georgia silent commit. There's a lot of LSU stuff, not more than Georgia, but there's still a fairly significant amount of LSU stuff that he puts out. And I'm not sure a silent commit, quote unquote, would be taking an official visit to Ohio State this weekend and then next weekend taking an official visit to LSU. And we don't yet know Milton's Georgia we don't officially know when his official visit to Georgia will be. We have a guess that it's probably going to be the Notre Dame game.
I think it's definitely going to be in season because of what Chris Milton tweeted the other day. So we have a pretty significant piece of evidence it's going to be in season, which gives it a strong chance of being Milton's last official, right?
Technically, yes.
And didn't these two at one point in time on Twitter? I'd never be able to find it.
I'm sure there's a DN90 we did way back when
about them two playing together. Because gosh knows that's not the kind of thing I'm gonna let sit there. Yeah. I'm gonna find that. Chris Barnes asked about why are we talking about Paris Johnson? Because if LSU is going to get momentum with one of these 2 running backs, I mean, I think that you've got to be able to sort of talk up the offensive line thing there as well. And Johnson certainly flirted with LSU, but if Johnson goes back to Ohio State, I think it's sort of hard, even with as well as LSU's recruited, I think it becomes a little harder to do all of this. The honest truth is, this is probably, to a degree, wishful thinking. Bryce Dixon says he can find it. Bryce is pretty candy on the whole computer thing there. Tim Hope says they want to play together. So I wonder if want is too strong. I wonder if I would almost play want with willing. I think that good, smart running backs may not want to play together, but might be willing to play together, and maybe that's something that Marshawn Lloyd wasn't. So, anyway.
I think there's a better chance Evans ends up at either Texas or Texas A&M than there is that he and Milton both end up coming to.
So you think there's a chance the top 5 goes to the top 7 at some point in time?
Yes.
See, that's what kind of frustrates me. I sort of feel like that's probably true as well. I don't know that he ends up going there, but I don't feel like those in-state schools are out of this yet for Zachary Evans, because top 5s, as I said before, are not binding referendums. This is not one of those things. This is not one of those things that's a binding referendum necessarily when it comes to that. Is there a chance that in your mind that Georgia gets Evans and not Milton?
Yeah, I could see that. I could see it. I mean, it depends sort of when Evans, takes his visit. But, Georgia was there in May during the sort of visitation period to go look at him and scout him. And, they've done a pretty good job of recruiting Texas. And, again, Georgia is RBU. It would not surprise me in the slightest to see, if Milton does go to LSU, then Evans might say, all right, well, then I'm going to go take the opening at Georgia. Because Georgia is should be a very, beyond just the RBU stuff, if just looking at the 2020 class in a vacuum, Georgia should be a very attractive option to these these guys, given that Harrion is definitely gone and Swift, in all likelihood, is probably going to go pro after this year as well. And I think what sort of works in potentially landing Evans is I believe he's hinted at like a February decision or taking his recruitment a little bit longer. And I actually think in this case it might help Georgia, just given that there will be more definitive answers about who is sort of on the team next year.
I think that's probably well said. Let me get some YouTube comments as well here. I had one I wanted to read. Now I can't find it. Chime Dog says 2 UGA 5-stars can get to the NFL as first-round picks without being used up before they get there. Best recruiting pitch of all time, and I think that it should be for sure. I think that the success that Nick Chubb is having, the success that Sonny Michel is having. I guess Chubb was not a first-round pick, but he's playing like one with the Cleveland Browns. He's going to make plenty of money before it's all said and done. Obviously, Todd Gurley, has been a big-time player with the Rams at one point in time. Not too long ago, he might have been the top player in the league. So, I mean, I do think that stuff's got to work, and I do think it helps Georgia. Unfortunately, I think Georgia's in a position right now where I do think it faces a little bit of pressure to at least lock one of these guys down. And I, somewhat half kiddingly, half seriously say I think that Georgia needs both, but I think they at least need one of these guys because you could blink your eye and not have enough running backs. I mean,
what was it, 2013 season where Georgia went from giving the ball to Todd Gurley and Keith Marshall to J.J. Green and Brandon Douglas.
Will Scott says that Milton Evans are a carbon copy of Michelle and Chubb at this point in their career. They just saw both backs drafted top 35 in the draft. Yeah, I mean, when you have that kind of success from a tandem that was coached by this coaching staff, developed by this offensive line, I think that's a really big deal. I have a hard time imagining that Evans and Milton both aren't paying very close attention to the offensive line stuff. I mean, the Milton family, one of the reasons why I've liked that group throughout this process is they seem to really be doing their homework, and I think they would be paying very close attention to things like that. Now, I suspect that Ohio State is still going to be heard from in a big way before all is said and done because I think Ryan Day needs himself a big recruiting win, and I know Ohio State linked to another running back that we don't really hear, in Georgia circles too much, but I think that Ohio State's still going to be heard from on this respect there as well. Saban's daddy says on YouTube, how many Bama fans does it take to screw in a light bulb? Only one, but you have to listen to all the rest of them talk about how great the dead light bulb was. I'm not sure that's very nice. Brian McPhail says, it's amazing how many breakaway runs that UGA produces. And I know somebody a moment ago also mentioned, hey, you got to be careful with Kendall Milton because he didn't run very fast. And he pushed back on something I said yesterday where I said that I'm not really concerned about those, kind of camp measurables necessarily. I'm not saying they don't matter at all. I have said that they don't matter to me the most of anybody else. And he mentioned Elijah Holyfield occasionally being tackled from behind a year ago. If 1,100 yards is not good enough for you, you're pretty spoiled. Because Holyfield had himself a pretty good year last year. And I realized that by almost any metric, he is just flat slow. I realized that.
Didn't look slow.
Holyfield played. He played legit last year. He had a very good season. So even if you bring in a Kendall Milton or somebody like that, honestly, they're going to have to do some work to just be as good as Holyfield was last year.
Yep.
So that's at least a point to mention. Nikki BR01 on YouTube, and I always butcher that name, says, any chance Milton and Evans would be a package deal? Obviously, I'd be very interested to see that, and if any school could pull that off, it would seem to be Georgia, just given the wealth of weapons it has in its offensive line right now and the fact that Georgia's pulled these kinds of tandems before. Saban's dad says, what do you call 23 John Deere tractors at a Dairy Queen prom night in Tuscaloosa? Pretty funny. I'm not going to lie. It's pretty funny.
I have a question. There's been some discussing this on the Facebook side. I want to give the correct commenter. Jimmy Hoskins saying Georgia must sign 2 running backs this year. Assuming there are no transfers, do you think Georgia has to, at this point, sign 2 running backs?
So, big year from Swift. He's probably gone. Big year from Zamir White. He sort of steps into the Swift role for next year. Brian Herrien's gone no matter what. What if James Cook doesn't get a lot of carries this season? What happens with him after that? Because if Herrien gets as many carries I think he's going to get, if Cook gets as many if White gets as many carries as I think he's going to get, and Swift gets as many carries as he's going to get, there's not a lot of carries left over. Mm-hmm. So we've seen patience rewarded with Elijah Holyfield. I think we're going to see patience rewarded with Brian Herrien. But is James Cook going to also choose to be patient? Some guys would, some guys wouldn't. I think that whoever ends up being that 4th running back, and by the way, you get a very interesting comparison between what Cook does well and what seemingly Kenny McIntosh is going to do well in terms of which one of those guys gets on the field more, depending on what Georgia needs more of.
Kenny McIntosh is a big bruising running back.
That's what I'm saying. You have a contrast. Yeah, the contrast between what they do well.
The same type of running back.
Yeah, the contrast. So, given the thought of, well, you would probably use them in very different scenarios. Cook potential on the field for 3rd and long, McIntosh potential on the field for 4th and goal. That also splits into carries for both those guys. This is not a statement about Cook or McIntosh, their personality or character. I just wonder how happy guys not getting carries are going to be in this day and age when the transfer portal swings like a Ferris wheel. I wonder about that. I hope so, though, because I think both those guys are really interesting prospects, and I really think it's just imperative that Georgia show some creativity in how it uses James Cook while it has an opportunity to do that. I mean, let's not forget, at one point in time we were saying, slot, lining up in the slot. Georgia's got an opening for that right now, and they got some potential names to fill that. But, I mean, I wouldn't mind seeing James Cook get a look over there as well. So, I think I'm assuming right now that Cook and McIntosh are running backs number 4 and 5 for Georgia this season. And I wonder what happens there. That's one of the reasons why I think signing running backs for this 2020 class one way or another is really important to make sure you give yourself enough options for next year. Jonathan Taylor Vance says McIntosh is younger and more likely to stay after a limited role in year 1. I think you're absolutely right about that, Jonathan. I think that McIntosh is coming here to Georgia on a long-range plan. In all likelihood, James Cook feels the exact same way about that. I think that's a very fair point, for sure. Gerald Harmon says the backfield is getting crowded. Might be the reason we might not sign Evans or Milton. Good problem to have. And I understand where you're coming from, Gerald, but I'll remind you that we also spent a lot of time around this time a year ago talking about how crowded the backfield looked. The one thing I said then, and I'm wrong about plenty, but the one thing I said then that turned out to be right is that the running back situation has a way of taking care of itself. And all of a sudden what looks like too many running backs has a tendency to turn into just enough. And, Zamir White unfortunately got hurt. That subtracted a name. DeAndre Swift wasn't healthy 100% at least at the beginning of the season. That subtracted a name. All of a sudden, Georgia went into a lot of games with really just enough running backs to get through the day. And as it stands right now, even with the wealth and depth that Georgia seems to have at the running back position in 2019 and really even in 2020, I think Georgia's going to be doing well just to have enough, even though it seems like they've got more than they need right now. There was also an interesting debate yesterday. I saw this on Twitter about how the running back position has never mattered less in the NFL than it does right now. And some of the NFL guys were asking, is that still true in college? And I guess statistically speaking, there's some evidence to suggest that quarterbacks really matter, and maybe even more so than running backs. However, I do feel that Georgia, because of the kinds of running backs that it has and the kinds of offensive line that it has, I do feel like Georgia is still a little bit of a different outlier there in that regard. That in the NFL, the play of the two quarterbacks determines wins and losses just 99.9999% of the time. And college football is kind of, I guess, trending in that direction a bit too. But Georgia would still, to me, seem to be a bit of an outlier when it comes to that.
Well, I mean, I think you can even look at Alabama. As well as Tua played in the national championship game in 2017, Najee Harris also played really well in the second half of that game and gave that Georgia defense some problems. Clemson, yes, Trevor Lawrence is very good. So is Travis Etienne, the running back they have there. In college, and granted, a lot of it is because you're just able to actually go out and sign all the talented players you can, whereas the salary cap limits that at the NFL level. But I think running back definitely still plays a big role. The reason Oklahoma was able to sort of hang with Georgia in that Rose Bowl game, it wasn't because of Baker Mayfield. It was because Rodney Anderson was running for 200 yards and running over dudes and playing like, and looking like an NFL running back at that point in time.
There's a college football writer named Bill Conley, and he said something on Twitter yesterday, and I've cited Conley on the show before. He said something on Twitter yesterday that I thought was kind of interesting. This is just a theory, but I think it's kind of interesting. That the farther down you go when it comes to football levels, NFL to high college to mid-major college to FBS to high school, blah, 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 the farther down you go, the weaker the defensive linemen get. I don't mean physically weaker. I mean in terms of their overall stature as players. You just have fewer really high-quality defensive linemen. I think that's a really interesting point. His suggestion is the reason why quarterback play dominates the NFL and running backs don't. He says the quarterbacks are way better than they are in college, and the defensive linemen are way better than they are in college. That does make a lot of sense to me, just given the fact that we talk all the time about how few truly elite defensive linemen there are at the recruiting level, and in the SEC level, nobody seems to have enough. And I think that's a really interesting point. And since Georgia's facing these teams that do have the best defensive lines, the teams that Georgia's trying to beat, the Alabamas, the Clemsons, to a certain extent Ohio State, although we haven't seen Georgia matched up with them yet, but that's still a team that Georgia's battling for playoff positioning against. Those are the teams that have the good defensive lines. There are only a few teams that really have high-quality defensive lines. Most of them are SEC teams. The rest are kind of the top national contenders for the most part, which is going to magnify quarterback play when Georgia gets into games against teams that are as good as it is. In the SEC East against South Carolina and Missouri and Tennessee and teams like that, for now, Georgia can just line up and run the ball and coast to a 17-point win. But against the Alabamas and the Clemsons of the world, your quarterback, whether it be Fromm this year or somebody else in future years, in those games, the quarterback is going to be magnified a little bit more. And I think that Conley brings up a pretty good point when he says that. Is that all you got on that? I'm
just reading comments.
You just give me a kind of a tepid. Thanks for that.
Yes, defensive. I think that's the biggest reason Clemson won the national title last year because they had the best line in college football. And I think that's the reason Alabama has been as dominant as they have been. It's not because of the skill players, the quarterback. Saban's won his national titles because he's always had elite defensive linemen, elite front seven.
All right, Alex Dean says he thinks that DeAndre Swift's going to be a first-round pick. I think there's a very good chance that at least could happen, although we don't see a ton of those anymore. It's also 11:52. We've really got to get off the air here pretty soon because I don't.
So much for having a short show today.
Well, I was supposed to have a meeting today and it got canceled, I guess. So we're just still sitting here. I want to make sure we get off the air before noon because it really seems wrong to stretch this thing into the lunch hour. And some of y'all got stuff to do, and I realize that. Brian McPhail says Carson Beck a 5-star after this season. I think he's got a great chance to be one. I guess the one thing that holds him back is his overall player rating. He's like 70-something, I think. You probably got to get in that top 25 as a quarterback to be a 5-star, top 30 at least, probably.
Yeah, I just got a text message. I think his 5-star rating and 5-star potential is really going to be determined by how well he plays at the Elite 11 camp in Frisco.
Yeah.
If he plays well there and looks really good, I think there is a chance that he can vault his way up and, sort of get in that 5-star discussion. And then, he plays well there. He theoretically plays well in the All-Star games. He does that. I think there's a very good chance he is, looked at as a 5-star quarterback, when the final rankings come out. But I think if being a 5-star quarterback is something that is important to him, and sort of being labeled as a top guy in the country, I do think that he needs to play well at the Elite 11, and there is a decent amount of pressure on him to sort of validate all this hype that he has got.
But he did play really well in high school games a year ago.
Yes.
Now, my understanding is his team may not be quite as skilled as it was a year ago. His team as a senior, they may not be as good as they were a year ago.
Right. So that's sort of why I think, if he goes and lights up the Elite 11, that'll really help his case. And, people will sort of be able to look past what his team does at Florida this year. Because his team in Florida last year, I mean, yes, they won a state championship, but, they were, I think, 6-4, 7-4 going into the playoffs. It's not like they were a team full of world beaters.
Joel Moody says that we have a red background because we're on a code red because it's been 72 hours since a commit. That's not the case, Joel, although that is a really funny line. All right, we're going to get ready to get out of here. Does anybody else have any final things they want to share? Facebook, YouTube, Connor, you got any final thing to say?
Keep Georgia, Florida, and Jacksonville at all costs.
I think that's it's really interesting to hear Connor, the younger guy, make the strong case for tradition. I think there's a pretty good argument for the cocktail party continuing to be a very, very special thing. Mike Anderson thinks that James Cook is at Georgia for the long haul, and there's a very good chance that Mike's right about that, and that's great to see. I think that's fantastic. Miriam Martin Corbin is going to buy her magazines today. I've already bought mine. She says she's going to sit on her screen porch with her dogs and sweet tea and revel and the talk about her DAWGS dogs. I think that's a really good idea, Miriam. Robert Barnes talking about some of those big numbers that Carson Beck put up at the playoffs a year ago. So that's all great stuff. All right. Thank you all for a terrific run of comments here. Don't forget, Jeff is on vacation, but we recorded Before the Hedges yesterday, so it'll air at 3 p.m. The good news is it'll start on time. We're scheduling. So you can check that out. Really good stuff from Jeff. The only thing is you can't comment and have us interact with you live today, and I apologize for that, but it's the decision we made to be able to deliver the show to you, so you can watch along and you can shout at each other in the comment section. I'm sure you will. And we're back tomorrow morning at 10 a.m. Huge thanks to R.S. Andrews for making the R.S. Andrews Cool Down possible. Thank you for being with us here as well. Check out R.S. Andrews online at rsandrews.com for air, heating, plumbing, electrical needs. My guess is you don't have a whole lot of heating needs right now, but your air conditioning, you want to make sure that's working. If it's not, you want R.S. Andrews to cool you down. They'll do that, and they'll cool us down here as well. We'll see you back here tomorrow for DawgNation Daily. Have a great day, everybody.